The Insider's Guide to Energy Hydrogen mini-series is brought to you by the Hydrogen Dialogue Summit and Expo, taking place December 6th and 7th at Nuremberg Exhibition Center.
This edition of the Insider's Guide to Energy Hydrogen mini-series is brought to you by Force, a leading international strategy and management consultancy with focus on the entire trading value chain.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy Hydrogen mini-series. Today we have with us Johan Dreyer. Johan, welcome to the series.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be here today with you guys.
Johan, before we kick off, maybe you could take just a second and tell us who you are professionally.
So I'm from Chile, although I have a very German name. I was born and raised in the Atacama Desert. And I have an academic background in politics and economics, and I did a master's in international energy, after which I developed my career in energy consulting and project development. So I worked in companies like ENGIE, BCG, Inicio, and now I launched my own consulting company, which is called High Match, and we specialize in the matchmaking of industry stakeholders in the global value chain of green hydrogen. On the one hand, and on the other hand, I'm also the president of H2 Antofagasta, which is the Association of Green Hydrogen Project Developers in the north of Chile.
Johan, welcome to our podcast, also from my side. So we heard a lot in the previous podcast from Germany, Germany's infrastructure, German hydrogen initiative and strategy. Now you from Chile. So what makes Chile so special when it comes to especially green hydrogen? Maybe you can tell a little bit more.
Sure. We've seen the exponential growth of the green hydrogen industry over the last 3 years, in which we have seen the rise of the so-called champions of green hydrogen in different geographies worldwide, such as Australia, African countries, the Middle East, and Chile. This is because, of course, 70% of the cost of producing 1 kilogram of green hydrogen relies on your cost of producing renewable energy, your LCOE. And certain countries, like such as Chile, for example, have the most competitive costs of energy in the world. Chile, for example, has the lowest one, under 20 megawatts, under $20 the megawatt hour. Which, of course, gives a very attractive economics behind the production of green hydrogen in this geography. And on the other hand, Chile is a very well-known destination for foreign direct investment in multiple industries, such as mining, for example, but now energy. We can see in studies, for example, such as Bloomberg's New Energy Financing Climatoscope of 2022, which Chile was chosen as the number one destination for investments in renewable energy projects worldwide among emerging economies. And hence, of course, this is an analysis of multiple criteria, such as, again, the cost of producing renewable energy, but also the political stability and the regulatory as well, visibility in terms of permitting and project development. So I think these are two key elements that make Chile a very attractive destination for developing green hydrogen. And also, and I think that's very important, Chile has both in the north and in the south, so Atacama Desert and Patagonia, the capacity for producing over 70 times more the energy that it needs. So Chile can potentially become a net exporter of renewable energy. And until very recently, we couldn't build transmission lines from Chile to China or to Europe. It was impossible to store, economically speaking, an electron, right? So we needed a green molecule to being able to store and then export these green electrons produced in Chile. And green hydrogen now provides a solution for this as a carrier of green energy, and hence now we can untap all this potential for producing renewable energy and exporting it to the main consumption markets through both green hydrogen and its carriers, such as e-fuels and green ammonia. So I think like those three elements are kind of like strong, let's say, factors for investing and developing green hydrogen projects in Chile.
Thank you, Johan. That is very, very interesting. So Chile is special when it comes to green hydrogen, I understand. And you mentioned these two regions. And one of the regions, Antofagasta, we learned that you are president of H2 Antofagasta. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this, what this organization is and what your role is.
Sure. Well, I think it's important to first understand the ecosystem of green hydrogen project development in Chile. So countrywide, we have over 50 projects currently being developed in the country. And we have pretty much all of the different business models for producing green hydrogen. So we have a group of projects which are large-scale gigawatt projects, which are export-driven and will export green molecules to the main consumption markets worldwide through ammonia and through e-fuels as preferred carriers. But also we have projects which are looking to produce for local offtake and local consumption driven by multiple industries, but especially the mining industry in the north. In the north of Chile, we have the largest copper mines and lithium mines in the world. Chile is the largest copper producer globally, with a third of the global production. And the mining industry has, over the last century, developed a whole value chain of related industries around the mining industry, such as desalination, such as renewable energy production. In Chile, we have the largest desalination capacities in Latin America. For example, in Antofagasta, the major cities are all supplied by desalinated water. And also the renewable energy industry has been around for over a decade. And Chile was one of the few countries in which no subsidies or feed-in tariffs were required for the production of renewable energy, because it was already competitive, because Chile historically has been a net importer of fossil fuels. Hence, the mining industry was paying very high power prices, and hence that was a big driver for renewables. So in terms of green hydrogen project development, the ecosystem or the portfolio of projects that we see in the north, it's very diverse and very heterogeneous. So we have the large-scale ammonia projects and e-fuel projects for exports, but we also see a very strong pipeline of small to medium-sized projects which will supply the mining industry, mostly in its logistics, in terms of freight trains or forklifts or trucks that are operated by suppliers of different kind of services for the mining industry. Because of this very specific ecosystem compared to the rest of the country, especially in the south, in Patagonia, which is exclusively large-scale projects for exports, it was necessary to create an independent and regional association which would be led by people from the region. For example, I'm from Antofagasta. I was born and raised there. And first of all, to coordinate these different players, because we have energy companies such as Engie, for example. We have industrial gases companies like Air Liquide. We have mining companies. We have desalination-related companies. We have ports. And all of these companies are entering the green hydrogen ecosystem. Hence, it was necessary to organize them and try to find common objectives and priorities to favor the development of projects in the region. Hence, we started a year ago, exactly next week, it's our first anniversary. We signed, we created legally the association. And we started with 8 companies, and now we are 12 companies, and we should be between 15 to 20 companies by the end of the year. So that's kind of like, in a very, very general approach, why it was necessary to create this organization, this association, and what we're looking to do is to, of course, decentralize the decision making, because Chile is a very centralized country. Most of the decisions are taken in the capital city in Santiago, and we want to change that, and we want to bring the green hydrogen industry to the people in the Antofagasta region, and of course bring the experts and bring the companies for them to have a closer relationship with the whole ecosystem, from the local authorities to the local universities, and of course the different civil and social organizations which are in one way or another related to the green hydrogen ecosystem.
Wow, that's quite a bit going on. Going from 8 to 15 members or 20 members is a pretty ambitious goal. A couple things come to mind. You mentioned offhandedly some projects. You said like rail and trucking and some other things. With your 8 members so far, do you have some projects that you're focused on, or are there some early projects that are in development that you could share some details on, and what kind of things you're looking at?
Sure. For example, in the region, as I mentioned, we have 24 projects currently being developed of different sizes and different technologies. And almost all of them are developed by our member companies. Not all of them, but a significant majority. And of course, what I can share is the public information available. But if I can give some different type of projects, because there is a strong group of green large-scale ammonia export-driven projects. But there's also one which is ammonia for local production, for local consumption in the production of explosives for the mining industry. So blasting devices for explosive in the mining industry. And then we have a couple of e-fuels related projects, and then projects for hydrogen for consumption in mobility applications. So 2 projects which I think are flagship projects in the region are, the first one is the one developed by Air Liquide. The project is called AMER, AMER, sorry. And this project, it has an installed capacity of 80 megawatts of electrolyzer. And it's an on-grid project, so it's connected to the grid. Of course, aiming to have 100% green PPA for the power supply. And Air Liquide, for example, announced that this electrolyzer will be its biggest one so far in the Americas. And the project aims to produce 30 tons per day of green hydrogen and 60,000 tons per year of methanol, e-methanol, which will be mostly exported. So Proman, it's the major off-taker of this methanol, which will be exported. This project also secured a subsidy from the Chilean government back in 2021 of $12 million, which will be used for a share of the capex of the electrolyzers. And the commissioning date, it's around 2026, so it's still a flexible date, but 2026 onwards, this project should be operating. And I think it's interesting because it's one of the 2 e-fuels project in the region, and they will capture the CO2 from a point source, which is a cement facility in the Antofagasta region. So kind of like to give you some idea on the economics of these kind of projects, not specific to the project, but what we are seeing with on-grid projects in Antofagasta is that the LCOH of these projects, so the cost of hydrogen, it's around $4 to $7 the kilogram of hydrogen, of course, depending on the size of the project, the technology, etc. But that's the range that we're seeing for the on-grid projects, right? And then another project, for example, that I can mention, it's on the green ammonia side for exports. It's a project called Atacama Hydrogen Hub, developed by a company called Humboldt Green Hydrogen. And this project has an announced electrolyzer capacity of 2 gigawatts, so 2,000 megawatts of electrolyzer installed capacity, with a commissioning date on 2027 onwards. And of course, this project is targeting mostly export markets. This project is located in the Mejillones area, which Mejillones is the biggest industrial port in Antofagasta, which there is a significant cluster of green ammonia projects looking to export through the existing port infrastructure in Mejillones. And these kind of projects, let's say the larger ones for exports, what we're seeing, again, this is not specific to this project, but a range of costs and economics of these projects. And LCOH for these projects, we're seeing between $2 to $3.5 the kilogram of green hydrogen. And the LCOA, or the cost of the ammonia produced through these projects, is roughly between $600 to $800 the ton, of green ammonia, which is quite competitive nowadays. So yeah, I think these two projects are kind of like a interesting ones to be shared and for comparison purposes, for example, on what's happening in Antofagasta.
It sounds exciting on the projects. One thing that was going through my mind as you were describing the scale of some of these projects is where does funding for these kind of projects typically come from? You know, from other countries, from individual institutions like you were talking about, and how competitive is Chile in that funding? Because I mean, there's a lot of capital, green capital, that wants to get placed, right? And folks are looking to get a return on that. How does Chile fit into that equation?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think like it's important to highlight that Chile, it's a very open economy. Chile is the country in the world with the highest number of free trade agreements. Hence, it's a very investment friendly economy for several decades already, and that can be seen, for example, in the mining and in the energy industry that we have. Actually, the energy industry for a couple of years now, it displaced the mining industry as the number one industry in terms of foreign direct investments. Hence, we rely, of course, mostly in foreign capital. Again, Chile, it's a small to medium-sized country in Latin America. It's still an emerging economy. So let's say the local financial markets are not big enough to cover the costs of these very capital intense projects, right? Which is a trend pretty much everywhere. So having said this, the companies, most of the companies, let's say the multinational companies that we're seeing that are developing projects in Chile, they are funding the first stages of these projects through equity directly, or doing, of course, project financing with their strategic partners. So I would say that at least until this stage, the projects have been funded by the companies, by developers themselves. The Chilean government has, of course, do its best to provide subsidies to the green hydrogen industry. For example, back in 2021, it allocated $50 million to 6 different projects for their electrolyzer capex. Of course, this is not a significant amount, but it shows the commitment of the Chilean government to actually boost the industry. And yeah, in terms of investments, again, I think there's a very strong dynamic of M&A today in Chile, and projects, what they are looking to do is to reach the ready to build stage, in which they can secure the funding for FID. However, now what we're seeing, it's mostly what projects are aiming for is to get DEVEX, so development expenditure capital from international investors. And in exchange, of course, they give equity of the SPVs. So basically, it's DEVEX for equity until they reach a ready-to-build stage in which they can do FID. So again, there's a very dynamic market at the moment, and Chilean projects are either looking for international partners or being developed by the companies themselves and funded.
I thought it was very interesting to hear that some of the hydrogen and ammonia is already being used locally. It's not all being shipped. So even though you said mining industry, are there other applications where the locally produced green hydrogen is being consumed? Or do you have a kind of a target that you want to achieve, that the local economy, the local population will use the locally produced green hydrogen or green ammonia?
I think, well, Chile historically has been a net importer of energy. So we have high costs of fossil fuels in all of the Chilean economy. So there's a strong incentive for changing this scenario through locally produced green fuels, which eventually will be cost competitive because it gives you energy independence and sovereignty compared to the variability of international fossil fuel prices. So we saw this already with in the power sector through the development of the green, in the renewable energy generation part of the value chain over the last decade. And now we're seeing a strong interest from potential off-takers as well of green fuels locally. For example, in the north of Chile, the mining industry, there's a cluster of mining companies called Altaley, which has the main mining companies active in Chile. And they published in March of 2023 the roadmap for green hydrogen in the Chilean mining sector, and they announced that the mining industry in Chile will be consuming around 500,000 tons of hydrogen per year by 2030, which translates roughly in 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity by 2030. So I think this is highly relevant, and it shows as well the commitment of the mining industry to progressively shift into green fuels. Because, of course, it makes sense if you get a cheaper, locally produced and green source of energy. And in this regard, for example, we see projects such as ENGIE's HYEX project, which is looking to produce green ammonia to produce explosives for the mining industry. So that's one example. We have another project, for example, which is looking to replace green hydrogen in the copper smelting processes as well in the north of Chile. We have as well the example of one company called FCAB, which is owned by a mining company. And this is a freight train operator in the north of Chile. And they bought a green hydrogen fueled train this year in China, which should be operating next year in 2024. So we also see penetration of green hydrogen mobility as well in the logistics and of the mining industry. We also see e-fuel related projects which are looking to produce as well e-fuels that can be used in blending in the mining operations. Because you need to understand that, for example, there's the core activity of mining, which is, for example, the huge mining trucks, which at the moment are very hard to be replaced by green fuel alternatives. So blending of e-fuels makes more sense because you're not going to ask to a mining company to replace their fleet of mining trucks for a technology that doesn't exist yet. So there's one that is being tested in South Africa, but still, like, we don't see this technology being mature before 2030. So what makes more sense is to replace them in trains or in smaller vehicles, such as forklifts, for example.
Johan, when do you reckon will Chile become independent of importing fossil fuels? When will that be?
Well, the national strategy of the national green hydrogen strategy which was published in 2020. Actually, Chile was the first country in Latin America to publish their hydrogen strategy, and one of the first ones in the world, which shows kind of like the early mover approach of the country in this regard. States that the targets are 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity installed by 2025 and 25 gigawatts by 2030. So a significant part of that electrolyzer capacity, of course, aims for exports, of course, because that's where the main off-takers are and the highest willingness to pay is for the first generation of green fuels. However, progressively, the country, of course, will see a higher and higher penetration of green fuels in the different economic sectors. But having said that, I think that Chile can comfortably be energy independent during the next decade. I think it's a hard question to answer with a specific year, but it's a small country, so 18 to 19 million people, and with a capacity to produce 70 times more the energy that it consumes. One of the things as well that we're seeing in the industry is that even though we have a first generation of large-scale projects for exports, these projects themselves probably will have spare capacity to be sold into local markets in Chile. And these are the projects that will reach economies of scale enough to be the cheaper suppliers. So we should have cheap green hydrogen and derivatives available from 2030 onwards.
You mentioned earlier in your conversation about exports, and I think you mentioned China and other places where you couldn't physically move electrons. And you said molecules are great. What I didn't hear was, what about South American market? You've got Brazil, you've got other markets nearby. Are there pipeline plans in South America? And will this, other than being locally to Chile, will you plan to sell hydrogen in the region?
Not really, because I think Latin America has already a very green energy matrix. Brazil has a significant share of hydro, and they are looking to be themselves a green hydrogen exporter, competing with Chile in that sense. Same with Colombia. Argentina has also a clean energy matrix as well. They have a lot of natural gas. They have a lot of hydro. Peru as well has a lot of natural gas. So I don't see, and of course they are not heavily industrialized economies, which could pay the green premium of Chilean green fuels in the short term. So I think that doesn't really incentivize or motivates the Chilean producers to sell locally. Compared to, of course, the opportunity of selling to the main offtake markets such as Europe and Northeast Asia, which are actively pursuing offtake contracts in the short term and paying this green premium. So at least in the first generation of projects, or let's say in the next 10 years, clearly it will be either the local Chilean market, because we pay for expensive imported fossil fuels, or export markets globally.
And then, so those global export markets, I'm assuming, are basically reached by ship. What is the infrastructure for the ports to scale up and meet that kind of export demand that you're projecting?
Yeah, I think that's a common pain point that we see pretty much everywhere in the countries that are looking to produce and export green hydrogen and its derivatives, which translates into common infrastructure for converting hydrogen into derivatives. Can be ammonia or can be e-fuels, and then exporting it, right? It's easier to export through an existing technology rather than exporting through a new technology. And e-fuels and ammonia, we already have existing capacities and technologies for that. They are mature industries. Hence, it makes more sense to export through these carriers, at least in the first generation of projects. And then, as for liquid hydrogen, that should be economically feasible from 2030 onwards. But at least what we're looking at the moment is in terms of ports infrastructure, of course, adapting, at least in Chile, the cluster of projects around one port, existing infrastructure to export the carriers through one port, and not for each project to build their own port, because it doesn't make sense. And there could be efficiencies gained, for example, in terms of the ammonia production facility, because so far, most of the projects are targeting to have their own ammonia production facilities, whereas these could be, of course, worked out into having one industrial ammonia cluster, which will be supplied by several green hydrogen producers, and then you will optimize the cost of ammonia production through one shared infrastructure. But this is still being discussed in terms of policy for adapting and placing the right conditions for this kind of decision making in the short term.
So I found it very interesting to hear that your local mining industry is basically the bridgehead when it comes to the decarbonization of the industry in Chile. What are the biggest obstacles there in order to keep the pace or accelerate the pace, include others on this decarbonization path? What do you see there locally in Chile?
Well, before answering to that question, I think it's important to highlight that in Chile, we have multiple pilot projects currently operating that produce green hydrogen and use green hydrogen locally. This year, for example, we saw the operation of one project which is injecting hydrogen into a natural gas pipeline for supplying domestic consumption in the central north area of Chile. So that we're seeing hydrogen blending in pipelines. That's already happening, up to 20% of the blend. And Walmart as well with Engie, they launch a project which is already operating, which is a whole fleet of forklifts in Santiago, in the capital, which is also fueled by green hydrogen. So, and we also have the project in Patagonia, which is the Haruoni project, which produces e-gasoline for exports. Porsche, the German car manufacturer, is the off-taker of that project. So we see, for example, these projects that are already operating and producing, and for local offtake, many of them. But as for the mining sector, which is, of course, expected to be the largest one in the coming years, I would say that the barriers are mostly two. The high cost of hydrogen mobility technologies. So basically, when we talk about the cost of fuel cell truck, when we talk about the cost of fuel cell forklifts, for example, all the mobility related applications, we're still seeing costs which are 3 times higher than conventional technologies. So that's on the one side. And on the other, of course, we still see a high cost of green hydrogen, despite being the cheapest one in the world. If we see projects between $4, $5, $6 a kilogram of hydrogen, it's still high. So I think that we need to bring those two sides closer through smart policies, and also for eventually the technology of green hydrogen technologies to go down, the cost, in the coming years, for helping the mining sector to give that pace. And I think something that also relates to that is that we're seeing, for example, that several players, again, it's easier to sell your green hydrogen through a carrier which is already, which can be quickly put into the market. Let's say steel, for example, green steel. It's easier to sell green steel compared to green hydrogen, because the off-taker of green steel will be willing to pay the premium because the whole value chain is already in place for producing green steel. Same with green copper, for example. But thing is, if the mining sector would have a premium, let's say in the main markets of the Chilean copper, which is the European Union or China, and that these off-takers or clients would pay more for a green commodity such as copper, that would be a big incentive as well for the mining players themselves to pay more to the green hydrogen developers for this premium. But again, this is not happening at the moment. So yeah, I think we're working on that as well. So again, I would say the cost of technology mostly, and also the steel.
And what about the penalty for greenhouse gas emissions? Will that play a bigger factor for the, let's say, the decarbonization of the Chilean industry?
You mean like a carbon tax?
Yeah, carbon tax or other factors that will actually make the production of green hydrogen more competitive in comparison to fossil fuel or traditional technology.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's a big discussion at the moment in Chile. The focus is still it's in export projects. I think that would come from the buyer side, right? Again, and it relates to the green copper approach. It's always the regulation that drives the market, and we see it in Europe. So if, for example, industrial players in Europe are increasingly more, influenced by the regulation, which is pushing them to go green, eventually the same will happen with the mining industry. And once that happens, there will be hopefully a green premium for this copper, and which will then be translated into the local ecosystem of projects in Chile.
It sounded like we're still early, right? You admitted that the cost is a bit high still. Your pilot projects is where you're at, and you're seeing economies of scale dropping the prices, which you're banking on, and you're banking on the off-takers, Europe and other countries that are trying to reduce carbon to help force the economies of scale there. I guess locally, what does this initiative mean for jobs and employment in the region? How does that help your region out? So are these jobs that are the people that are going to be working in this new industry doing something else and changing jobs, or these creation of additional new jobs in your region?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Well, we need to be very clear that the green hydrogen production, it's very automatized and very. I went to the largest plant in Europe a couple of months ago, which is a 20 megawatt electrolyzer facility, and it was operated by 3 people. So and this is not like exponential in terms of like those 3 people can probably operate a much larger facility as well. So. Volume, I would say, of production does not translate in number of jobs, and that's the same trend everywhere because that's how the industry operates. Same with a solar plant, with a wind farm. However, we see from the energy industry itself, they are shifting their workforce from thermal plant operation or fossil fuels related power production to renewable energy and green hydrogen operation. So there's already an in-house sort of like shift internally in terms of the technical expertise needed for this. I think where most of the value is in the manufacturing capacities of technologies related to green hydrogen. So what we're seeing, for example, with countries like the Middle East and others, is that the local content aspect of producing green hydrogen related technologies is important. So by this, I mean eventually manufacturing electrolyzers or fuel cells in Chile, right? And converting capacities and industrializing the economy related to this green hydrogen industry. So I think this is kind of like what eventually in the future should add a larger role to the job creation side.
Thank you, Johan. I learned a lot about Chile and what makes Chile so special comes to production of green hydrogen. And I think that is reflected also in the fact that a delegation of German politicians went to Chile in early spring from the federal state of Bavaria to see these projects as they take shape. What do you think Germany can learn from Chile when it comes to production of green hydrogen or the hydrogen strategy, national hydrogen strategy?
Well, I think Germany is highly involved in Chile for many years now in terms of green energy development through GIZ, through Fraunhofer, through main operating companies like Siemens, Linde, Porsche now being the off-taker of the first e-fuel project in Chile. So I think Germany has a lot of stakes in the game and has a very good and profound relationship with Chilean project developers and players in the energy industry and in the mining industry as well. We also see Germany active, for example, in the financing of hydrogen projects. Something that I didn't mention before in the financing question is that the Chilean government, together with 3 international banks, one being the World Bank, the other one the International Development Bank, and the other one the German bank KfW, they are launching a facility called of $1 billion, which will be allocated to green hydrogen projects in Chile. The Chilean government is putting 200 million, and the other 800 million are placed by these 3 banks. So this will be very cheap debt to the first generation of projects in Chile. So again, Germany is also involved through that. So what I think that Germany, I don't know if Germany can learn many things from Chile because they're very different economies. And of course, Germany is a net importer of green hydrogen and it's a technology exporter. Chile is an exporter of green hydrogen and a technology importer, right? So I think the synergies are natural in that sense, and the opportunities are strong, not only for Germany, but also for other industrial economies in Europe. But I think the relationships are strong. There's an MOU between Chile and the Port of Hamburg as well to boost the exports from Chile to Germany in the near-term future. So again, I think like the cooperation opportunities are already quite solid and they can only grow in the near-term future.
So the synergies, this is very interesting. And I guess that if you want to learn more about these synergies, there's a very good opportunity at the Nuremberg Hydrogen Dialogue, which will take place December 6th in Nuremberg. There will be the ambassador of Chile to Germany will speak there and will tell us a little bit more about this connection between Chile and Germany. And there will also be a delegation from Chile that will be able to tell us and tell all the visitors to this hydrogen dialogue more about what's going on in Chile with respect to the production of green hydrogen. So thank you very much, Johan, for this very interesting dialogue and these very interesting facts and figures about H2 Antofagasta.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Johan. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. For our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's been full of content. It's been extremely interesting to hear about what's happening in Chile, hearing what, how this applies and how green hydrogen is really growing. If you like this content, don't forget to follow us on Insider's Guide to Energy Hydrogen mini-series. There's a lot of content still to come. It's a great series. If you've enjoyed our guests, don't forget to visit them in Nuremberg at the Hydrogen Dialogue, December 6th and 7th. You get a chance to go talk to them, ask them follow-up questions. And we will see you again next time on the Insider's Guide to Energy Hydrogen mini-series. Bye-bye.